This is NASA TV.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today at Johnson Space Center as we discuss the upcoming Crew-6 mission to the International Space Station. We're targeting no earlier than February 26th at 2:07 a.m. Eastern Time for that launch, carrying NASA astronauts Steve Bowen and Woody Hoburg, as well as United Arab Emirates astronaut Sultan AlNeyadi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. They'll be on a long-duration mission to the International Space Station, and we're joined today by panelists to discuss that upcoming launch and mission. To my left, we have Kathy Leaders, the Associate Administrator of the Space Operations Mission Directorate, Steve Stitch, Manager of the Commercial Crew Program, Joel Montalbano, Manager of the International Space Station Program, and joining us virtually, we have Sarah Walker, the Director of Dragon Mission Management at SpaceX, Sergei Krikalev, the Executive Director of Human Spaceflight Program for Roscosmos, and Salim Al-Mari, the Director General of the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center for the United Arab Emirates. We're going to start off with some opening remarks for our panelists today before we get into the question and answer portion of the session. If you have a question and you are on the line, please raise your hand by pressing *1, and if your question is answered, you can remove that by pressing *2. But before we get there, we'll start with our opening remarks, first from Kathy Leaders.
Thank you for being here. You know, this week is often a solemn and a thoughtful time for us in the NASA family, with the 20th anniversary of Columbia yesterday and our Day of Remembrance tomorrow. And it's just multiple reminders for us that we need to, in human spaceflight, remain vigilant and continue to recognize that we are keeping the safety of the crew in our hands. And so we're really headed into a very critical time right now in our joint operations in LEO. In fact, we're heading into, I would say, one of the busiest increments in the history of station. You know, we have a string of critical missions coming up with the flight of the replacement Soyuz, our Crew-6 launch, our Crew-5 return, and all that work is going to be preparing us with the crew complement to support the critical science that we'll be conducting, and then the additional crew visits that we have with our Bowen crewed flight test and our Axiom 2 mission. You know, I look at the patch, and this panel exemplifies to me the ISS collaboration, right? Here we are with our ISS program and our commercial crew program team, our partnership here with SpaceX, our professional relationship and continued relationship, teamwork with our Roscosmos partners. And then here we're getting a new face. Salim's joining the team on the increment. But I want to wrap up by saying this team here knows that they need to focus on us doing this right and us carefully working through each of these missions to ensure the safe operation of the International Space Station and our ongoing operations there. Thank you. And Steve.
Thanks, Kathy. It's an honor to be here representing our commercial crew program team today. This is always a time of year for me to sort of step back, and as we have our commercial crew program Day of Remembrance activities tomorrow, to think about what we do and the diligence that it takes to put every mission together, the care of every spacecraft, the care of every decision we make relative to analysis and all those sorts of things. So, you know, spaceflight is certainly challenging. It still is challenging here in 2023, but we take that very seriously in commercial crew and are looking forward to a safe mission when we're ready to fly. It's exciting to be getting ready for Crew-6 as we get into that final phase. A lot of the hardware is already at the Kennedy Space Center. Dragon is being processed, is going through those final checkouts, and the crew will go down. I know Sarah will talk more about it, but the crew will go down and do a checkout of that spacecraft this weekend and look at the interior and all the systems on the spacecraft. We have almost all of the Falcon 9 hardware at the Cape for the flight. We still have the first stage is still getting its final processing in McGregor, Texas. It'll ship down around February 4th or so, and then we'll have all the hardware down for the flight for the final, putting all the final pieces together. You know, our NASA and SpaceX teams are doing the final reviews of all the data for the flight. We're in the process of closing out any in-flight anomalies from other missions, and we're in the middle of doing that. Extremely proud of the team that we have. We've been working really hard, even through the holiday into the new year and getting ready for Crew-6. And then, as Kathy said, we have a busy spring in front of us. We'll take each mission, you know, one step at a time, and the first one is Crew-6. And as Leah said, the launch date is February 26th, nice early in the morning, 2:07 Eastern launch time. And we'll be ready when the vehicle and all the hardware is ready to go, and the crew and all the other things it takes to execute the human spaceflight mission. Following that, we'll have about a 5-day handover, and then we'll bring the Crew-5 Dragon home. We will do an inspection of that vehicle before we bring it back, and that'll be around March 4th is when we'll undock and land, and a couple weeks before that, we'll inspect the heat shield and make sure it's ready to come home. And with that, I'll turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Joel Montalbano.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Kathy. As Steve and Kathy mentioned, the Day of Remembrance, we also take a time out this week in the space station program and kind of reflect on the lessons learned and make sure we're still carrying those forward. It's important as we look at human spaceflight that we learn from the past and that we never forget and always bring those lessons with us. You know, on Crew-6, we're excited to talk on the horizon of another crew exchange mission, right? These missions are what we do, and they are what we can take together and showcase the International Space Station. With this crew, with Steve, has 3 flights behind him. This will be his 4th mission. He'll be flying with 3 first-timers. Combination with Steve and then Frank Rubio on orbit, they'll help the first flyers get going. And this expedition will be another example of what we can do with the International Space Station. This crew will be scheduled for about 250 experiments for research. They'll also be doing technology development for exploration, as well as commercial low Earth orbit activities. We're continuing the integrated crew exchange that we started last year in the fall, so we'll have another cosmonaut on this mission. We'll also have the first long-duration United Arab Emirates crew member on the International Space Station. And Sultan, if you remember, he was the backup for Hazza when Hazza flew on the Soyuz. And so he's very familiar with the International Space Station, familiar with our program, and it's excited to have another country's astronaut on board, and it's excited to expand human spaceflight across the globe. This mission will launch on February 26th. Steve mentioned we'll have a short handover with the Crew-5. The Crew-5, they're not slowing down. They have about a month to go, and we'll be excited once they're back on Earth. But those guys are fully subscribed, and we're keeping them busy with the science and utilization on board the International Space Station. Just a few days prior to the 26th launch, Roscosmos will launch the uncrewed Soyuz on February 20th. The docking will be February 22nd, so 2 days later, what's commonly referred to as a 34-orbit rendezvous. And so we're excited. You know, Kathy mentioned, you know, how busy the time frame is. And so just to kind of lay out, we have a launch of a Progress vehicle in early February. We have the Soyuz that I mentioned, the Crew-6. Right after Crew-6, we'll have a SpaceX 27, a cargo mission, followed in April by the Northrop Grumman mission. We'll have the Boeing CFT mission in this year, and then the Axiom 2 mission also in the second quarter of this year. And so that's just the first part. You keep going. We have another SpaceX Cargo Dragon mission, another Progress mission, Northrop Grumman mission throughout the rest of the year, Soyuz exchange, another crew exchange, just rocking and rolling. And so with that, huge thanks to our international partners, huge thanks to the Commercial Crew Program, huge thanks to SpaceX and all our domestic partners. With that, let me hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Joel. I'm also very excited to start talking about the Crew-6 mission with all of you. This is our first human spaceflight mission of 2023, and it kicks off an exciting year for ISS, an exciting year for Dragon. Crew-6 is SpaceX's 8th human spaceflight mission to the International Space Station, and overall the 34th Dragon mission to the orbiting laboratory. It's been an honor to work with Steve, Woody, Andrey, and Sultan, and we look forward to supporting their journey to ISS together in a few weeks. I know there's often interest in the specific vehicles being used each mission, so this is the first launch for this Falcon 9 booster and our fourth flight for the Dragon spacecraft, for a human spaceflight mission. Say that 5 times fast. Fourth flight. This specific Dragon, it's named Endeavour. We previously flew it for the Demo 2 mission, the Crew 2 mission, and the Axiom 1 mission, all to the space station. So Steve mentioned we've got our crew equipment interface test coming up in about a week. We like to call it the Dragon test drive. It's a chance for the crew to get into their flight vehicle, into their flight suits, connect everything together, and really just get that final feel before their launch day that everything is working well together, comm checks, umbilical checks, everything. Thank you for including me in today's briefing. Thanks from all of us here at SpaceX to NASA, Roscosmos, and the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center for their trust, partnership, and close collaboration on the Crew-6 launch. Lee, I think you're ready to hear from our international partners.
Thanks, Sarah. That's right. And for our next opening remarks, we'll go to Sergei Krikalev, the Executive Director of Human Spaceflight Programs for Roscosmos.
Good day or good evening in our time. This time is the second time when Russian cosmonaut is going to fly on SpaceX, and Andrey Fedyaev is going to fly on Crew-6 and join our long-duration mission on Russian segment of International Space Station. And he's going to replace Anna Kikina, who is working now on board and going to return back with Crew-5. So we see that this type of activity, exchange mission, integrated crew, is very useful and increase reliability of our missions. And as Joel said, we are going to send unmanned cargo vehicle Progress to International Space Station on February 9th, and going to send Soyuz to replace previous Soyuz on February 20th. So that's basically it. I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Sergei. And just before we go to our questions, we are going to turn it over to Salem Al-Mari, the Director General of Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center for the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, good evening from Dubai. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. Today, I thought I'd give a quick introduction to the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. Maybe a lot of our listeners today are not fully aware of the center itself. We were established as a government entity based in Dubai in 2006, so close to 20 years. And we have 4 main areas that we are working in currently. The first was and is Earth observation satellites, where we build satellites from 100 kilos all the way up to 1 ton here in Dubai and the UAE. The second program that we have is our Mars exploration program, where we launched jointly with the UAE Space Agency the first mission to Mars from this region. It was launched in 2020 and orbited Mars in 2021 and is operated today from the center here in Dubai. Our third program is a focus on moon exploration, and we recently launched our first rover to the surface of the moon. This hopefully should land with the Japanese lander sometime in April of this year. So that's an exciting program that we're working on, and we are planning our second and third rovers as we speak now. And the fourth program, which I will delve a little bit more and get more details on, which is our UAE astronaut program. This is, of course, the human spaceflight program. This was kicked off in 2017, and through that program, we launched a selection process, and we selected our first 2 astronauts, Hazza al-Mansouri and Sultan AlNeyadi, who is a member of the Crew-6 today. We had 4,000 people apply to that program. We selected those 2 gentlemen, and we had our first mission to the ISS through an agreement with Roscosmos, where we had a short duration mission in 2019 to the ISS. It was a very successful mission. We had hundreds of thousands of students and a lot of outreach that was done through that mission, as well as science. And this was really a push from the UAE to say that we want to be a long-term player in human spaceflight. as well as one of the players that can contribute to human spaceflight. Today, of course, we're talking about our second flight. Before I talk about that, I will say that after that flight, we then signed an agreement with NASA to train our 2 astronauts and 2 additional astronauts. After that was signed, we then selected 2 more astronauts, where we selected the UAE's first female astronaut, Noura, and another additional astronaut called Mohammed. All of those 4 astronauts have been training in NASA. The 2 new ones joined a NASA Ascan class, and Sultan and Hazza continued training, maybe we can say additional training from what they'd learned in Russia. Today, of course, Sultan is a very capable astronaut. He's been training in NASA for the past 3 years. Altogether, he's got over 5 years of training. He was backup for Hazza al-Mansouri and went through the whole process of that type of mission. He's also capable and fully trained in EVAs, fully trained in operations of the ISS, and we hope that he can be a very active participant in this flight. If we look at what we will be doing in this flight, we have over 20 science experiments from UAE universities, from UAE institutions that Sultan will be conducting on the flight, as well as over 15 PAO events with universities, students, leadership, various participants here in the UAE and globally that we think will create a big impact. We also have a lot of education activities for the kids and a lot of different operational elements that we will coordinate with NASA. That's all I'd like to say from my side, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our briefers that are joining us today. We will now move into the question and answer portion of the briefing. Again, please limit yourself to 1 question. We have a lot of interest today. Please direct to whom your question is addressed and state your name and affiliation. And if you're on the phone line with us, please raise your hand by pressing *1, and please lower it by pressing *2 if your question has been answered. So we'll start here. Do we have any in the room? Okay, start here.
Mark Carreau with Aviation Week and Space Technology. I believe this is for Kathy and Joel. How would you assess to this point the way the space station partnership has dealt with the Soyuz leak, coolant leak, and the sorts of issues it's raised, and just planning for certain events and reaching milestones beyond that event itself?
Why don't you get started?
I'll say that as always, the team pulls together internationally and domestically to address anything we have, anytime we have a problem on orbit. Roscosmos has been fully open with us. In fact, Ken Bowersox and I were over in Moscow, as many of you know, a week and a half ago or so, and talking to Roscosmos as well as their prime contractor, RSC Energia. And SpaceX has been an awesome partner as we looked at what we can do with the Dragon to help us protect on contingencies. So from a partnership standpoint, both international and domestically, the team hasn't missed a beat, and this is how we do the day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I think it's also really important to show how that integrated crew and that integrated crew strategy and planning helped us really be able to work on having the most robust strategy possible working through this, right? And so we were able to put together different options and work different strategies to be able to deal with what was a very low probability event, right? And we always plan for the best and the worst sometimes, but you know, it's why we look at that strategy and having that resilient strategy for these very low probability events that allows us then to have the strongest logistical and operation posture as a joint team.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now take it on the phone. We have Robert Perlman with Collect Space.
Question for Joel, I think. Just to keep just to understand, with the extension of the MS-22 crews stay on the ISS and the arrival of Crew-6, is this an extension of Expedition 68, or when does Expedition 69 begin?
Robert, that's an excellent question, and we've been talking about that this week. As you know, should you just change over expeditions with the new Soyuz, which is typically what we do, or should we extend? And we're probably a week or so away from making the trigger and deciding which path we're going to go.
Okay, our next question is from Marcia Dunn with AP.
Maybe along the same lines, Joel, how long is this particular mission, Crew-6? How long are they expected to be up there? The shortest or the longest? And for SpaceX, I'm wondering if the Soyuz leak and impact strike, was that sort of a wake-up call for you? Could something like that happen to the Dragon while it's parked at the space station? And are there any plans to try to make your capsule more robust so something like this couldn't happen? Thank you.
I'll take the first part. It's about a 6-month mission, and so 180 days, 182 days or so is what we're planning for Crew-6.
I can start out with what we've done, and then maybe Sarah can jump in relative to MMOD and the Dragon. First of all, we have designed that vehicle to have a certain amount of shielding for the environment already around critical systems like the propellant tanks and other areas. And so we went in with the design knowing that this was one of our highest risk areas, and so we put some shielding and different things in place. We do obviously inspect the vehicle before the vehicle returns, and so we'll do an inspection in the couple of weeks prior to undock. And then, just yesterday at the Program Control Board, we started to talk about a little bit, is there anything we can do now that the environment may be a little higher than in the past? Could we go put in some additional shielding? And we'll go work with Sarah and the SpaceX team to go lay that in and see if there's something else we can do. We certainly understand MMOD is a big risk. When I worked on the Space Shuttle program a number of years ago, it was our highest risk. We had one flight where we almost had some significant damage to a radiator that could have been a mission impact as well. So we continue to watch it very carefully and know that it's something that we have to manage very carefully for these missions.
And we did have Sarah on. I think she was muted. So Sarah, if you wanted to add anything, feel free.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. I was going to say all the same things Steve just said. So we do continually assess Dragon's on-orbit health. We perform these weekly checkouts. We do more extensive monthly wake-ups of the systems that aren't nominally exercised while they're docked. And we've already performed both of those since the Soyuz incident about a month ago. So the Dragon systems are healthy and operating nominally and within flight rules for Crew-5. And then related to MMOD specifically, we do perform an on-orbit photo video inspection using the ISS's robotic arm to look around the exterior of Dragon about 2 weeks before each vehicle departs. So that was kind of our nominal process to survey of any indication of MMOD impacts. And this flight, we do also plan to ask the crew to do a visual inspection of Dragon's windows just to ensure there were no effects from the coolant leak that might have been evident there. But I echo all of Steve's words.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Thank you very much. I got a question for Joel and Steve. Looking at the contingency plans, when you guys talked about moving the seat liner for over to the Crew Dragon so 5 could come home on that if they had to between now and the late February and 2 down on Soyuz. Can you give us some details on how that works? I mean, how did you accommodate that 5th crew member? Where, what kind of, strap-in procedures you have? Would you have comms? I mean, how would that work? And related to that, I know you guys looked at the possibility of, could you at least in theory anyway bring 7 people down? Where does that stand with SpaceX? Is that something that would be possible, or did you guys rule that out? Thanks.
Okay, I'll start, Bill, and then Steve can jump in. So Frank will be returning again if we have an emergency and if we have to evacuate space station. He'll be in the cargo area. I'll say an area where we normally bring cargo back on the Crew Dragons. He will not have a suit. We brought over the seat liner. We brought over his comm cap. The comm cap was brought over not for communication, but to help keep his head positioned, and so his head doesn't move around. And so that's kind of where we set up. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would say, Joel said it very well. When this first happened, we started looking at, like we always do in spaceflight, okay, what is available, what could work, and so we figured out this cargo area. We might be about the right size to put a seat liner and a crew member down in this area. And then we went off and analyzed all the different things that we needed to have in place. Is the airflow acceptable? Can we maintain carbon dioxide scrubbing and all those sorts of things? Do we have enough oxygen and supplies for him? And we figured that was out. And then, we looked at how would we position the seat liner is perfect to restrain the crew member in this area to keep Frank safe. So we looked at taking some cargo straps from actually the CRS-26 vehicle. Those fit very well on the pallet. We were able to put the straps over Frank and then the seat liner if we needed to, and then secure him to the floor of the Dragon. And then we looked at, hey, is it going to be okay to land in this configuration? Should we do that? And we went and did all the kinds of analysis we do in terms of accelerations for the crew member, and those all came back acceptable. And so we convinced ourselves it was a good posture to be in for this contingency, as Joel said, if we really would have to evacuate ISS. And then, we could actually accommodate 2 more crew members in this cargo pallet area if we needed to. And so we're ready to do that if we needed to. I think in this situation, it was a good compromise to bring 1 crew member over and then have the Soyuz available for the other 2.
All right, our next question comes from Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thank you. Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now. I think my question may be partially for Joel and for Steve Stitch. You talked about reassessing the schedule for future upcoming crew and cargo flights. We know Crew-6 is no earlier than the 26th of February now. After the changes to the schedule, I needed to replace the launch the replacement Soyuz. Can you kind of walk through the first half of the year, the schedule for the crew and cargo missions going up to ISS? If you have target dates, you can share as well. And one of those I know is a CFT Starliner. How's that coming along? That's probably for Steve Stitch.
Okay, I'll start. Both myself and Sergey mentioned the progress on February 9th, the Soyuz on the 20th. We talked today about the Crew-6 on the 26th. About 12 days or so later, we'll have SpaceX 27, so that'll have to move if we have any slips in the 26 or in the Crew-6 or the Crew-5 undock. And then in early April, we're planning the Northrop Grumman mission. We're looking at mid-April or so for the CFT mission, and then, like I said, the second quarter of the year for the Axiom mission.
And I'll talk a little bit about CFT. So it's a pretty exciting time frame relative to CFT. The crew module and the service module for that mission have been mated, and that occurred over the last week. We have completed what we call a mission rehearsal of the flight software in a high-fidelity lab called the ASIL, which has all the avionics, all the flight software, and that's kind of an end-to-end from launch all the way through the end of the flight, and that's gone well. We've had the crew down for a lot of training. They're starting their final phase of the training. We're in the middle of some final software testing for kind of some off-nominal scenarios in that same facility. So right now we're looking pretty good. And then the one thing we have to do that's a little different is from OFT2 is close out a lot of certification work for that flight, and we are working hand in hand with Boeing to do that work over the here in January and all the way up through the April timeframe. And so we'll take our time. We'll work through that certification. We'll work through the vehicle processing, the final testing of the flight software, and then we'll go fly in April if we're ready. I know Sonny and Butch are very excited, and they're having a lot of fun going through their final phase of training. So.
Our next question is from Jackie Waddles with CNN. Jackie, are you on the line? Okay, we can come back. We'll move on to Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hi, good afternoon. Question probably for either Joel or Kathy. What's the long-term outlook for integrated crews going into this fall and beyond? Are you still planning swaps on the Soyuz and Crew-7 missions this fall? And does Frank Rubio's extended stay on the station change any of those plans? Thanks.
Okay, so right now we're still working with Roscosmos on the swap in the fall of this year. My goal is that we continue the integrated crews. I think it's important, as Kathy mentioned earlier, for the program and for human spaceflight. So we're not finalized yet on the fall, but we are continuing to work in that direction.
Next on the phone, we have Lauren Grush with Bloomberg. Hi, Lauren, can you hear us? Okay, we will check back in. We'll go to Michael Sheets with CNBC. All right, it looks like next up we have Tim Fernholz with Quartz.
Hello, everybody. Tim Fernholz with Quartz. Thank you for taking my question. This is for Sarah or maybe Steve or Kathy. But I'm curious for Dragon training for international astronauts, how that proceeds given export control rules and ITAR. Are there waivers that are used? We heard from the Inspector General last week there were some issues with cooperation with Japanese astronauts on Artemis. So I was curious how you solve these problems for commercial crew. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. We've had the privilege to train a number of international partner astronauts, had a number of them go through our training flow now: France, Germany, Japan, Russia, Italy. So of course we follow all ITAR regulations to a T. We have similar rules in place for our employees and any visitors to our facilities. So we stay in lockstep with our export compliance team. I've got a text relationship with that team there. And so they stay super tight with my team and the training team just to ensure that we're able to train our astronauts fully for their missions.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky we have the framework of our, under which, the International Space Station was established, that kind of established the export environment and our relationships, and then that whole framework was obviously also coordinated with headquarters and the other agencies as we brought on our commercial partners. So this has been an export framework that's been in place since we brought on the new contracts, and honestly was built on over the last 20 years of in the International Space Station. It's actually another place where the International Space Station continues to create learning for our agencies and our nation on how to better collaborate and obviously comply with our export rules, but allow technical collaboration on these key activities.
Our next question comes from Richard Tribeau with the Orlando Sentinel.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This is for Sarah Walker. With this being the fourth launch of Crew Dragon Endeavour, how many more launches would it have left? And is there any plans to expand the fleet beyond the 4 Crew Dragons that are in play? But also, what efforts are being made to ensure the same level of human safety on Crew Dragon's eventual replacement, Starship? So it being a new design, not fixed wing, not a capsule. And that's my question. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for your question. So we actually have one more Crew Dragon vehicle in early stages of production now. We expect it to come online and enter the flight rotation late next year, I believe. So that'll bring us to a fleet total of 3 cargo vehicles and 5 crew vehicles. And those are already certified for 5 flights each and well underway through their qualification campaign to expand that much further. We expect 15 flights for most components. So I think that will carry us well through the manifest that we see ahead of us.
Our next question comes from David Denault with About Space Today.
Just once again, the launch time, somebody verify that. And if we don't launch on the 26th, what is the next available date and launch time? And another question I have for Sergey, on the return of the 22 vehicle, do you expect any interior damage from the heat?
Yeah, I can address the launch time question. Yeah, the launch time for the 26th is 2:07 a.m. That's Eastern time. And then we're well set up for 3 launch opportunities in a row that would satisfy the requirements to dock at the International Space Station. And the launch time, for the next day, I don't have the exact time, would be about 23 or 24 minutes earlier. So, it'd be about 1:40 something Eastern time. So.
Always scary during math in public.
It is. Yeah, it's very.
And as for my part of the question, we are going to return back damaged vehicle basically in nominal mode. We have several backup opportunities using different equipment. And we expect the temperature inside equipment compartment and the crew compartment is going to be higher than nominal. That's why we don't return back crew using this Soyuz. But we know that most of equipment built with pretty big margins. So we expect that temperature is going to be higher, but we think that temperature wouldn't exceed the limits that could damage the equipment. So even if some of equipment will work not in the proper way, we still hope to return vehicle in control mode, and we are going to use this reentry as another test opportunity.
Thank you, Sergey. Our next question comes from Joey Roulette with Reuters.
Hey, thanks. I guess this one's for Sergey and Joel. I just kind of want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. If there's a station emergency before MS-23's arrival, Prokopyev and Pedalin would go into MS-22 and Frank Rubio would go into the Crew-5 vehicle, correct? And if so, then Joel, I guess, why wouldn't Rubio go into MS-22 and what gives us the confidence that MS-22 is safe in an emergency scenario versus a nominal scenario? And then also just for Sarah real quick, I would love to hear from your perspective how SpaceX worked on all this and engineered through all this, particularly how you guys would be able to fit 7 crew members in Crew Dragon if that was necessary. Thanks.
Okay, so what we wanted to do is help reduce the heat load in the Soyuz. So by removing Rubio from the Soyuz, you take away 1/3 of the human heat load. And so with that, we worked with Roscosmos, a plan that we moved some of Frank's, we talked earlier, the seat liner, the comm cap, and there was one other item we moved over to the Dragon. And then such that you'll reduce the heat load in the Soyuz. And Roscosmos has worked to look at the Soyuz. They've looked at, how they would do an expedited undocking and landing to get quickly to the ground. Again, just a reminder, you only have to do this if you have an emergency on board and it's determined by either the crew or the flight control teams that the emergency is such that you can't stay on board. The first thing you'll do in an emergency is obviously address that emergency, which the crews are trained. Both they get trained in Houston, they get trained in Russia in order to address the emergencies. Again, only if they have to evacuate.
Yes, and I think a lot of good words have been said already. The team did an extraordinary job of working through analysis that carefully examined the environmental conditions, the vehicle center of gravity, the astronaut protection associated with this kind of emergency return. And then we met together as an integrated team and determined that Dragon would support a safe return, actually of up to 7 crew members. So you may not remember, but in the early days of developing the Crew Dragon vehicle interior, we actually laid out the interior to accommodate up to 7 individuals. And then that was later adjusted to convert 3 of those seats to spaces that could be used as cargo storage areas. So right now we fly with 4 seats on the upper deck and then 3 cargo pallets down on the lower deck. So the current contingency preparedness setup the 4 Crew-5 crew members would be located in the existing 4 upper-level seats, and then one of the spaces on the lower level would be converted back from a cargo area to a crew seating area by securely attaching, as Joel mentioned, the Soyuz seat hardware. So I think it was already said as well that Dragon has plenty of margin, even with the additional crew member, with respect to onboard life support commodities. So that allows us for multiple landing site opportunities in the event of an emergency return. And then because someone touched on the spacesuit specifically, I did want to note that the Dragon vehicle is actually designed to support the crew without the suits. So the suits are there for additional protection in the event of a further in-flight contingency event. But the nominal return of Dragon does not require flight suits.
Our next question comes from Will Robinson-Smith with Spectrum News Orlando.
Hi, thank you all for taking the time this afternoon. Question for Steve and Sarah, I believe. Can you talk about the progress on upgrading Pad 40 out here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station to support cargo and crew missions, and when you expect to launch the first cargo test from that pad? And then I guess question for Joel, is there any science launching aboard the Crew-6 mission, and can you talk about what that might be? Thanks.
I can start off on Pad 40, and then we'll let Sarah add. SpaceX and the NASA team have done an incredible job laying out the crew and cargo capability from Pad 40. We've already been through a number of preliminary design reviews on that pad, and then also we've been through a number of the next level, the first level of preliminary design, then critical design review on several of the systems at the pad, and then recently SpaceX has started groundbreaking on that pad, and actually the initial work to clear the site and then pour the pilings for the crew tower, and then I'll let Sarah finish and comment on when that capability might be available.
Sure. Yeah, we're excited. We think it enables even greater flexibility to our Dragon customers. You mentioned the work that we've started, and our primary focus first will be to allow cargo missions to launch and just allow them to be interchangeable between the 2 pads, 39A and 40. And then we'll add in the final certification elements for human spaceflight capabilities soon after. But we're seeing good progress towards readiness in the fall and expect to be flying Dragon missions off of 40, or at least have the option to do so if 39A, if it's a better balance for the manifest to fly them off of 40 by late fall.
And from a science standpoint, we'll continue a lot of the experiments with the Crew-6 that we started on Crew-5, and even some earlier increments. We'll continue the human research work that we do. As far as the details of the exact science, we have a briefing coming up as we get closer to launch, and we'll go over all the additional science that we'll do in detail for the expedition.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, we have one more question in the room.
Thank you so much, Michael White. I'm from Russian Sputnik News. Please, I wanted to ask, is there any direct cooperation between SpaceX and Roscosmos? And, SpaceX has also a goal to go to Mars before 2030. Will NASA cooperate on that, or Roscosmos, or is it solely SpaceX thing? Thank you.
Sarah, you want to take the SpaceX part, and I'll talk about SpaceX-NASA cooperation.
Sure. So I think speaking for SpaceX, we are excited to train the crews that are given to us for our vehicles. And so it's been an honor to train now 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts now for Crew-5 and now here for Crew-6. And so we look forward to continued partnership.
Yeah, and within NASA, obviously, we're really excited because we've been laying out our Moon to Mars strategy and how we're laying that in and how we're working through that. I was participating in an architecture review this week and laying out the plan. So I'd say I don't want to give any spoiler alerts to further news that Jim Free will be bringing out over this next few months. So stay tuned, and we'll kind of keep this focused on the Crew-6 piece. But I'm sure that there's going to be lots of opportunities within NASA and international partners for there to be future collaboration as we're making these really critical steps to go to the moon and prepare ourselves then to go to Mars. Thank you.
All right, thank you to everyone who joined today in person and on the phone, and of course a major thank you to our briefers and all the questions that they answered for us. We are not done for today. Our Crew News Conference, where you will meet the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonaut themselves, is coming up at 1 p.m. Central Time, so we hope you will tune in and join us for that exciting event. We're also looking forward to Crew-6 launch no earlier than February 26th. But that wraps it up for us this morning. Thank you for joining us.